Okay, thanks for listening, guys. It's podcast number 3 for the MRS group. That's my old friends from college, Maiden, Rob, and Sparky. So I did get 22 views on the last video, so apparently there are some people that are at least seeing some of these other, you know, these presentations outside of our little 4-man group. But wanted to just thank you guys for watching the last one, and I did get some feedback. Maiden sent me a message. He thinks that I'm obfuscating and deflecting by not answering his questions about the moons that he's observed through his telescope on Jupiter or Saturn. I can't remember which. And it's not that. We're going to get there, and it's going to be. It's not something that's going to happen in a day. Obviously, it's been over a week since my last podcast for y'all. But I just want to show you guys that we've been lied to on a massive scale. And I think it helps to go over an easier to solve conspiracy. I think with the day after September 10th, there is just an unlimited number of places I can go to show you guys, hey, this doesn't make sense. And with the shape of the Earth, there's just as many, but because you guys can't identify a motive with the shape of the Earth, and I think I can see a motive, but it's so out there compared to the motive on the day after September 10th. So the big fruit that we got from the day after September 10th was the Patriot Act, and now we see where they're wanting to, the political party that's in power now wants to label their political opposition domestic terrorists. Now, are they going to use the Patriot Act? I don't know. Did they use it on J6? I don't know that either, but I do know that been reading on the Gateway Pundit that some of those people, some of them that didn't even go in the Capitol, have been like jailed in Washington, D.C. for like 18 months without a trial. I don't think they're using the Patriot Act yet, but they wouldn't have done the day after September 10th if they didn't have plans to use it. I can guarantee you that. So the things that I wanted to point out about the last podcast is I basically I feel like I brought up 3 compelling pieces of evidence, and 2 of them were ignored. So the first one was that when Hani Hanjour was bringing in, I think it was Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon, he had 30 acres of target if he would have come in and tried to attack crash the plane into the roofline on this suicide mission. And none of you guys responded to that one. So in light of the silence that I got back from all 3 of y'all, I have to assume that this is a compelling piece of evidence because you guys didn't argue on behalf of the beast on this one. And I think it's a very compelling piece of evidence. Why in the hell wouldn't you crash it into the roofline? And the other piece of evidence that we brought up was that all of the, and we played a video clip from the mainstream news talking about how the offices of all the top brass were on the opposite side of where the explosion was. So I didn't hear any feedback on that one. I'm going to assume that that is probably a pretty compelling piece of evidence. Sparky did argue that, on the interview with Jim Myslishevsky, the NBC News correspondent who was stationed at the Pentagon, he said that, well, of course they would have said we're next because, this was a known target after the Oklahoma City event, which I also think was a lie. But regardless, I'm going to play back this clip. When Jim Myslishevsky says we're next, to me, it's like, if I've got a 1-run lead in the 9th inning, I might say we've won. We've won this bet. Okay, but there's going to be a certain tone of uncertainty in that claim because the 9th inning ain't over yet. There's still a chance you can lose it. When Jim Myslishevsky says we're next, to me, it's like the game is over. Okay, the score is final. There's no doubt in his mind whatsoever. So let me play that little clip for you again, right here.
And I bumped into a U.S. military intelligence official, and I said, look, what have you got? And he said, obviously, this is clearly an act of terrorism. And then he got very close to me and almost silent for a few seconds, and he leaned in and he said, this attack was so well coordinated that if I were you, I would stay off the E-ring where our NBC office was, the outer ring of the Pentagon, the rest of the day, because we're next.
See, to me, that we're next, that sounds very, very definitive to me. Now, you guys can make up excuses and say, well, he we're a potential target, is what he really meant to say. There's no certainty that we're going to get hit, but to me that sounded very certain. Okay, so we're going to go on to just talk about how I think you guys are, what's the word I'm looking for? I think you guys are aware of the reality of what went on in 1930s Germany, but I don't think you guys have really come to terms with how big this conspiracy was. The official story, at least at one time, was that they loaded up 6 million people and took them off to these camps. And the people in Germany did not know what was going on. I think the German people were probably aware that this group was being, rounded up. I don't know if they kept that part out of the press, but they sure as hell didn't know that these were death camps. And you just, I want you guys to stop and think about that for just a minute. They literally were rounding up a percentage of the population, hauling them off to camps, and the German people did not know that they were being systematically murdered. And I'll submit that if you can control the press, you can get away with something like that, as long as you can control. Now, I don't know if they had TV back in the 40s. I don't know when that all started, that technology, but I do know that they had newspapers and they would have had radios. And I'm saying right now, if you can control the mainstream press, there's absolutely nothing you can't do. I mean, there is nothing you can't do. So I'm going to play this little clip here. I made a documentary back in, 2015, 16. I got some really cool software and I enjoyed playing around with it. But I made a documentary, and it was about the day after September 10th. But as part of that documentary, I included this little clip here from the church hearings in 1970s. So I'll just play this little segment of my documentary, and then we'll move on to the next piece of evidence. Let's go.
From this New York Times article dated August 8, 1945, we read, "The work on the atomic bomb was the best kept secret of the war. For keeping the secret, special praise was given to the newspapers and radio broadcasters of the day. The Manhattan Project simply could not have been kept secret without cooperation from the press. You see, in the minds of the American public, if it isn't here, it simply doesn't exist. And if it is reported here, then it's been investigated by a free press, and it's the truth. The press in the United States is the only industry that's protected by the Constitution. A free press is supposed to be the fourth branch of government, a watchdog, if you will. But as far back as the 1970s, the free press had been infiltrated by the CIA.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Your administration can...
Okay, so I'm just going to pause it right there. So, I mean, you guys didn't just fall off the truck. He basically didn't want to confess this to the American people, but we all know that they had CIA agents working in U.S. television networks and contributing and working for AP and UPI. That, I mean, that's just obvious. So here's another one with George Bush. I'm going to play this clip for you. Let's go.
Continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There is a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy. This has been a long-standing practice of the federal government to use these types of videos. You know, Ken, I mean, there's a procedure that we're going to follow, and the local stations ought to, if there's a deep concern about that, ought to tell their viewers what they're watching.
Prepackaged news. News reports created by the government, handed to the press, and presented to the viewers as independent journalism.
A lot of people think the big news stories today are the snowstorm that's hitting the Midwest or the looming federal budget cuts. But judging by local news, there's apparently an even bigger story that's sweeping the nation right now. Check it out.
Well, if you filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are on the rise. I know.
That's kind of scary. Yeah. I really think, what a coincidence.
Okay, so I know you guys have seen those news clips before, and it's not just, you know, all the Fox affiliates or just all the CBS affiliates. It's Fox, it's CBS, it's NBC, and it's ABC. All of them are getting the same script from somewhere, and they're all playing this same thing. And, you know, I totally don't think that we have anything even remotely resembling a free press in this country. But I can also tell you that if you've got that much control over the press, and believe me, I don't know how it works. I've scratched my head on this many, 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 many times. But I guarantee if any of you guys were to contact a journalist at the Dallas Morning News or the Oklahoma City newspaper and say, hey, why don't you guys run a story, you know, asking questions about the mysterious collapse of the building 6+1 that happened on the day after September 10th? If you guys were to contact them, you might find a new journalist that might say, hey, I'm gonna try to investigate this, and that is suspicious. But what would happen is that journalist would be shot down by the editor. And so my thinking is it's no more complicated than this. You just find a guy like Maiden and promote him up to be the chief editor at the local newspaper. And you know, I don't know how else you can explain it. I have no idea how this is done with this many newspapers, this many radio stations, this many you know, people, Time Magazine, Popular Mechanics. None of them have ever once run any true investigation or any kind of an article questioning the collapse of that building. It's never happened, and it won't happen. Not in our lifetimes. And you know, that should be eye-opening for y'all. You know, to see that they can get this little, you know, ice cream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. They've done that on the local news. They've done them all, and then the gas prices on all the local news affiliates. I don't have any idea how it's going on. I just know that it's going on. And that's all I need to see. I don't have to solve the mystery of how this gets carried out. I just know that this is the reality that I'm living in. So that's going to be the entire podcast for today. I've gone 15 minutes again. I guess I'm going to have to start advertising these. They're not going to be 5 to 7 minutes. They're going to be 15 to 20 because they don't go short, especially when I put these clips in there. But I'd like for you guys to text me back and just let me know. Do you feel like you're being propagandized by the mainstream press? Do you feel like the press is free to report on whatever they want to report on? I'd like to get y'all's feedback on that. I know Sparky watches CNBC all day long, and do you feel like you're being propagandized when you watch that? Do you feel like you're getting a true independent and free press on that? I'd like to hear what y'all have to say about that, because that's how I think they were able to carry out something as big as the day after September 10th, and we saw them do it in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s. That was the first thing Hitler did, was take control of the press. First thing he did. I mean, you can watch the History Channel for 5 hours and you'll have that, you'll know that, I mean, that's just what they say about how this went down. So I'm not going to bring up any real compelling evidence for the day after September 10th, other than to say that I think with this much and this level of control of the mainstream press, pulling off something like the day after September 10th would be child's play. So let me know how y'all feel about that. See ya.